Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. This is a Soulfire production. Episode number 67. Well, hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Healing Catalyst podcast. And to all of my South Asian sisters and brothers, aunties and uncles, happy Diwali. From me and my family to you and yours. May light shine through darkness today and every day, through our words, through our actions, and from our hearts. May we all see the light that lives within each of us, for it is the spark that comes from the same source. You know, Diwali is the festival of lights, symbolic of the spiritual victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and knowledge over ignorance. It's about the internal dialogue that we each have within that comes from connection to our inner knowing, to our higher self. And it seems really fitting that this week, as we continue with our intention for the month of October of connection to self, that we are going to explore connection to self through silence and stillness, through meditation, with my guest, Dr. Romie Mushtaq. Dr. Romie is a board-certified physician, award-winning wellness speaker, and the founder of the brainSHIFT at Work. She brings together over 20 years of authority and experience in neurology, integrative medicine, and mindfulness to not just deliver programs, but to create cultural change. She's on a mission to transform mental health and wellness in the workplace and currently works with Fortune 500 companies, professional athletes, and global associations. Dr. Romie is also the Chief Wellness Officer for Evolution Hospitality, where she scaled a mindfulness and wellness program to over 7,000 employees. Her expertise is featured in the national media such as NPR, NBC, TED Talks, and Forbes. In our conversation, Dr. Romie and I dive into the difference between mindfulness and meditation and the science of meditation. Dr. Romie breaks down the 3 phases of what actually happens in the body and the brain when we meditate, specifically the immediate effects, the short-term effects, and the long-term effects. We also dive into the pattern interruption that meditation allows, moving us into a different state of mind, and how meditation allows for connection to self through a connection to a universal intelligence. And make sure you stay until the end when Dr. Romie tells us about her brainSHIFT protocol that helps to quiet what she calls the busy brain and burnout. You know, I met Romie earlier this year and we had an instantaneous connection. I so deeply respect her and her work, and she is indeed a soul sister of mine. I'm so happy to share my beautiful conversation with Dr. Romie Mushtaq about connection to self through meditation. Romie, I am so excited to talk to you, sister. I have been wanting to get you on this podcast since I met you earlier this year. You're a brilliant neurologist and doing so much in mindset and mindfulness, integrative medicine. I have so many questions for you. I can't wait to talk to you. Thank you for being on the podcast today.
My sister Avanti, or as we say in our culture, Api, is for sister. It's an honor to be present for you and your listeners. I don't take anybody's time for granted. And so if they were drawn to listen to today's episode, whether they're coming from your community or my community, welcome to the sisterhood.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so, I wanted to spend some time today talking about meditation. And, I've never really had an episode on this podcast. It's funny because I've
What?
done almost 70 episodes. I've talked about it, but I've never had an expert like you on, a neurologist who does this, every day in their integrative medicine work, your neurology practice. So I feel like you just bring this beautiful perspective of the Western medical perspective of meditation And then also our, Eastern perspective being a South Asian woman in medicine. And so let's start sort of talking about meditation and what happens in the brain. Like, there's so many studies. I mean, meditation is actually one of the best studied modalities from the Eastern traditions in Western medicine. It has so much data. What's actually happening in the brain when we meditate?
Hmm. Oh, such great questions, and I'm gonna break it down because I heard so many statements and everything you
Yeah,
were saying, and, I start by saying this is we've gone from introducing meditation when I gave my TED Talk back in 2014, and it seemed crazy that I was talking as a doctor, practicing meditation, teaching it to other companies, and helping stress and burnout, to now the pendulum has swung the other way, kind of like exercise. Everybody knows, okay, I know I should meditate. I know it's good for me. I would do it, but I can't shut off my brain. Your watch may beep and be like, it's time for a mindful pause. And you just beat your watch and I'm going, I don't got time for this. Right. And
right.
and so I think I want to really honor that journey and just say before you turn this podcast off and give it side eye going, girl, I don't need another lecture on meditation. Just sit with the sisterhood, sit with my sister Avanti and I, and we're going to welcome you in no matter where your state of your brain is. So I always start by this story, if it's okay. And I think it
Please.
helps other people understand. I loathe that meditation got these images on Instagram of largely Caucasian women sitting in skimpy matching yoga clothes in lotus position or other complicated positions, holding their hand in a certain mudra, which wasn't always right, and showing off fashion and their toned bodies. I mean, great for them. I'm not judging them. But that really skewed what meditation means in the Western world. And when I think of my mindfulness and meditation teachers around the world who are from different religion and spiritual backgrounds, I think most of us just scratch our heads at what's happened to meditation in the United States, that it's become capitalized. It's just like a car, Avanti. People will be like, "Are you gonna buy a Mercedes or a Ford pickup truck?" They couldn't be more different and the needs different. There are different types of meditation, and then people will often take a meditation that is of an Eastern tradition and put their name on it and say, "This is Romie's meditation, this is Avanti's meditation, and my meditation is better than yours, and no, I have a study." And all of that has gotten us so confused. So I really want to welcome in the listener and talk about how I first define meditation. And that's being still and being present. When we look at the various Buddhist traditions of meditation, they talk about being present without judgment and detached from emotion. And in my world as a neurologist, and we work with Fortune 500 companies, so we're dealing with highly success driven people, they were like, what do you mean be still and not have judgment and not have
Yep,
emotions? Like, I
absolutely.
have multiple browser windows open on my computer right now and multiple browser windows open on my brain. And I feel like
Mhm.
meditation is that. There is meditation or way to pause and be present in every major religion of the world. And even for those people who choose not to practice any religion or be on a spiritual path or be agnostic or atheist, for me, meditation is this brain training to be still and be present. And gosh, doesn't it become ever so difficult in this modern day world? So I really wanted to just start with that introduction and how I approach meditation. And then I'll start answering maybe some of your detailed questions about the brain science. What do you think? And what would you say? Because you are an advocate of meditation and mindfulness yourself. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say, I totally agree because I think the thing that comes up so much from students and patients and people that I, speak to and teach is this exact question of, I don't know how to meditate. I don't get it because I cannot sit still in a lotus position on the floor, on a cushion, and empty my mind. And I just always giggle when they say that. I'm like, if you empty your mind and you're not thinking this idea that you're going to not have any thoughts when you're meditating, you're not alive because as long as we're alive and breathing,
Yes.
we are thinking. whether it's conscious or subconscious, right?
Agreed, agreed. Oh my god, I say the same thing in lectures because I often set people up and say, "How many people feel like they've tried and failed at meditation?" And the entire audience will raise their hand.
Exactly.
It is a wise Buddhist saying of emptying your mind. But when I talk to my Buddhist teachers and mindfulness, it's not that they say, yes, your thought is it. When they say empty your mind, it's take your focus off of your worries or a focus or a story of an image and learn to become detached from it. And I say the same thing that unless you're under general anesthesia or dead,
Right.
you're not going to have an empty mind. It's this idea of if I can control my mind, I can control the situation. So, I think that's where we talk about meditation and being mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is having present centered awareness, and we can have that present centered awareness when we're eating, when we're walking as leaders, when we're in conversation and listening. Meditation is actually the act of finding present centered awareness. And regardless of what religious path someone has, the way I say we do this is really an act of starting with controlled breathing and being present with the breath. And then there's various types of meditation after that. And I'm here as a doctor who tries to keep up with the plethora of studies that you mentioned to say please don't fall into the trap of what car is better, what style of meditation is better, what style of meditation should I be doing. What we know is whether it is mindfulness meditation, mantra meditation, centering prayer meditation, a focus meditation, they all have the equal and same benefits in the brain and on health and well-being. And so sometimes I know there's like a big menu and you're like, where do I start? And you and I will dig into that in a minute or two here. But I really kind of wanted to give that 30,000 foot view of meditation before we jumped right into science.
No, and I love that. Thank you for doing that. I want to click into one thing you just said, which I think is so important, the nuanced difference between mindfulness and meditation. Because again, the language that we are using in Western culture, everything is getting collapsed, whether it's cleanse and detox or, mindfulness and meditation or, yoga and asana, like everything gets collapsed. And it's actually, there are nuanced differences that are so important. And so, what you said, and I want to repeat this and make sure that I'm saying this the right way, is that you're saying that mindfulness is this awareness, right? Versus meditation is the act of the awareness.
Yeah.
I really paraphrased it, but
Mindfulness is your state of being, a present centered awareness. So when you
mhm,
practice meditation, it makes us more mindful. And we learn to be more present with our children or with your employees or more present when you're eating, right? And meditation is the actual action and act of saying, what can I do to bring my brain to present centered awareness and mindfulness based meditation, which, largely comes from the Eastern traditions of Buddhism are that. And so I want to be clear on that. So I thank you for helping that distinction.
yeah, no, I think that's really important because I think it's very easy to confuse the two and again to collapse them. And so it can be actually very confusing because if someone is talking to you about being mindful or having mindfulness or, eating mindfully or acting mindfully, right? That is not the same as meditation as you're distinguishing. So I think that's a really important point for us to click into.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's move into the brain science of meditation. I think that your introduction was beautiful of that, 30,000-foot view, but let's go into like what actually happens in the brain when we're meditating.
So it's actually a form of biohacking. The brain is how I describe it, that we're changing the internal state of how our brain is structured and how it functions when we meditate. So don't fall victim to, I see wellness lectures or segments on TV, and people will point to one region of the brain and say, if you meditate, you're going to fall in love. If you meditate, this section of the brain lights up and you're no longer depressed. Poof.
Right.
Yeah, I wish the brain was that simple, but it really isn't. And what I want to start again from a 30,000 foot view is there's a complex change in multiple networks in your brain when you meditate for the first time, whether it's 5 or 20 minutes. And then there are other changes that happen in complex networks in the structure and function of the brain when you meditate regularly for, they typically, the studies are 4 to 6 weeks. And then if you're a lifelong meditator, there's even different sets of changes we see. So immediate, short term, and long term changes that we see. And then always remember this, that just from a basic neuroscience part, our brain controls every organ system in the body. So when you meditate and there's changes in these networks, it positively impacts your hormone system, your digestion, your breathing, your respiration. So that's kind of something I want to tie into. So we'll start with the immediate effects of meditation. If someone is listening and they haven't meditated for a long time, or they're like, "Oh, I did it once here and it felt so good," or you were in my lecture and you meditated and you're like, "I need to get back." Why did that feel so good in a room full of people? Or even if you put your headset on and listen to a guided meditation from an app. What immediately will happen when we have about 3 to 5 minutes of deep breathing. And for those that really look at the different types of yogic or pranayamic breathing, it's when the inhalation is shorter than the exhalation, you're actually helping to calm down the acute stress network or the fight or flight response. We know this. We blow off extra CO2. There is changes in the blood vessels that start in our carotid receptor at the neck and signal the autonomic nervous system of the brain to calm down, and releasing what we call the start of a parasympathetic responsive relaxation, and that's just in the first 3 to 5 minutes. And so the stress hormones go down, and we see, rather than being in fight or flight or a sympathetic response from the autonomic nervous system, we've now switched over like a light switch to the parasympathetic response, and it's cueing the brain to relax and calm down. And in that 3 to 5 minutes, we say, I'm a chief wellness officer at Evolution Hospitality. We have over 7,000 employees. Power of Pause is our custom mindfulness program that I lead. That in that 3 to 5 minutes we meditate as a team, it could prevent you from having that angry outburst at a colleague, or saying something that you're going to regret, or mindlessly finishing an entire bag of potato chips because you're stress eating. That's exactly what happens in that 3 to 5 minutes, in very simple terms. And now, once you continue beyond the deep breathing and you decide that either you're going to sit in quiet, you're going to recite or repeat a mantra, a phrase, or a word, or stare at a candle, that benefit in your brain continues. And that we know, as the parasympathetic response releases, now you're going to start seeing some of the other feel good hormones in the brain get stimulated. Initially, it's some of our serotonin and oxytocin, that feel good, sleep good, love hormone. And you're like, wait, I don't want to meditate in the day. I'm going to fall asleep. No, that doesn't happen. Because if you're sitting there long enough, I kind of describe, you start to get something known like the runner's high, that a dopamine surge. It's often what the spiritual teachers, and we'll talk about, coming to a sense of self or your inner knowing, what that happens. And that we know can happen within 20 minutes. And then the physical responses of just one session in 20 minutes, we now know you've disengaged the networks that typically make someone anxious. If you're having ruminating thoughts in the frontal lobe, the executive center, and it actually disengages the anxiety center and brings back the executive function in the brain. So now, after 20 minutes, if you have multiple browser windows open on your computer and brain and you've been stuck on a project, all of a sudden there starts to be an ability to improve your focus or improve your emotion to that. And then a lot of benefits even from one meditation session. We see the heart rate start to come down back to normal, or lower blood pressure as well, digestion. So it can, just having a meditation session, um, you know, uh, daily, improves the ability of gut motility and it relaxes. So, whether you're on the loose stool or constipated side, it just helps to bring that into balance. And so that's a very simplified term of what's going on. You can ask me more questions. And that's immediate meditation, just the first part.
Right, that's the immediate, and
Mhm.
we're gonna talk about short term,
Yeah.
longer term. But what's interesting about what you said is that it's almost like it interrupts a pattern, right? The browser windows, you close them, it's like resetting, but you're interrupting a pattern, which I think is one of the most powerful things for so many people who are dealing with so many mental health issues, so much anxiety and anger and stress and just all of these emotions, especially since we've been in this with pandemic world. I don't even know how to describe it anymore. You know, I think that there is just that alone to be able to interrupt this pattern that we might be in is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, completely. I love that you said it's interrupting a pattern. And the vision that came to me while you were saying this, we started off saying emptying your mind. And I'm like, I actually feel
Mm,
like what you're doing is cleaning up your mind. And listen, I'm
yes.
old school from the cassette tape generation. And I don't know if anybody listening to this podcast remembered having filing cabinets and offices that were full of papers and charts. And hey, you may be in an office. I mean, give a shout out on social media to Avanti and I if you still got file cabinets in your office. And I feel like you're opening up the file cabinets of your brain and just allowing yourself to throw out files you don't need, and you're closing the files you don't need to focus on. And it's all of a sudden organized when you do that. I love that analogy. That was just came to me while you said that.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's this interruption, right, that resets everything and allows you to come back in a different state almost, in a different yeah, in a different state of mind, quite literally. I guess that's the way you know? Yeah,
It is, and that's why people feel good after the first meditation. So let's talk about intermediate meditation, where
absolutely.
you've been now meditating, most of the studies say, to the best of your ability, 20 minutes a day, for 4 to 8 weeks. That's when we start to see intermediate changes. The first stage, we see a lot of chemical changes that are in the brain, and the brain's like, "Oh, I like this girl." The
Mhm.
second stage is actually so powerful. So that same area that we were discussing, the amygdala, and that it goes into the hippocampus, we now know your temporal lobe, when you start meditating regularly for 4 to 8 weeks, actually starts to change. We release something known as BDNF, brain derived neurotropic factor, the same thing that we see when you exercise regularly, and that we're actually growing cells in the memory area of the hippocampus region. So, when people say, "Oh, as you get older, your memory gets shot." No, it's because we have inflammation, we're not taking care of ourselves, we're sleep deprived, all of that. You can actually grow some of those cells back. 'Cause I think of one of the quotes, the studies I still love to quote to this day is Dr. Sarah Lazar's study. She's out of the Herbert Benson Mind Body Medicine Institute at Harvard Medical School back in like 2014 or 15. She did the brain scans of, I think 20 to 25 meditators and who had never meditated before, and followed them, and actually saw growth in this area. When I went to med school and in neurology, they were like, "Your brain cells don't grow back." Yeah, they do. You can stimulate growth and repatterning. So that's one thing to know, but it's not only your memory in that area, then there's, like, better emotional control. So look, you have triggers, Avanti, I have triggers, stuff pisses us off, we get emotional. Have you ever wondered, like, how some people can control emotions, good or bad? Like, this helps that. And then as you get into this intermediate meditation, 4 to 6 weeks, what else starts to happen? The pathways that are complex from this hippocampus and the brain that are tied to prefrontal cortex, frontal cortex, and your kind of pain center. We know that now you've interrupted the networks that when something happens, you get anxious, a little bit of tweak in your back, and you have severe back pain that requires pain medicine. You have such severe depression, you're in a brain fog. Those networks now are overridden, and new pathways are created in your brain that are now actually lifting you out of that depression. We know in clinical studies that have now going on for a decade that starting a regular meditation practice for 20 minutes a day in somebody who has refractory depression is as powerful as taking an antidepressant drug.
Mhm.
So
Incredible.
it is. And the studies are there for anxiety, for chronic pain, for so many conditions. And so, we don't have time, but this is just kind of a very simplified overview of the structure and function of the brain. And so, Vante, I'll be honest, I've had a regular meditation, and people, if they've seen my TED talk, and we'll give it in your show notes, know Since about 2010 when I got sick and went into life-saving surgery. I mean, back in those days, my aunties were giving me cassette tapes to learn meditation. Like, that's how.
Right.
And, initially, I gotta be real with you, I saw the benefit right away, and I lifted out of the burnout and the depression, and I didn't need post-op pain meds. And then you feel better and you're like, "Oh, it's okay if I forgot to meditate today, I'm traveling."
Mhm.
And it would be like a interruption of my brain for, like, just 3, 4 weeks, and I wasn't meditating regularly, and all of a sudden, that anxiety, busy brain pattern came back, and I'm like, "Oh, this is what happens when you stop meditating." So, it's kind of like losing muscle mass if you've been going to the gym and pumping iron and taking protein, and then you take a month or 2 off, and you're like, "Wait, my muscles aren't as lean as before." That's exactly what's going on with the brain when with intermediate meditation.
Yeah. And so is that for the listeners what is meant by neuroplasticity? Because this is a word, this is a term that gets thrown out, is in the
Overused.
studies. Yep, it's in the articles. People will hear about it in this wellness world, in this very health focused world. So let's just define, what does that mean? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, to some degree. Neuroplasticity actually is a neuroscientific term that has been oversimplified, and sometimes I get Indian auntie chest pain just thinking of how it gets, simplified, right?
Right.
Neuroplasticity in its, finest terms does mean, an ability of a brain cell and network to change and adapt.
Mhm.
Whether that is a good or a bad thing. So neuroplasticity was studied in epilepsy, right? And that if one part of the brain was seizing and we surgically removed it, another part of the brain could be trained to start having seizures. That's not a good thing in the brain. But the same thing can happen about neuroplasticity, we know, with improving the brain's ability to its cellular function to help in processes like memory and emotional control and mood and feeling calm instead of anxious or depressed can happen with a regular meditation practice. I think what is challenging for me is people make that five-step leap, and I don't know, you could speak to this as well. When we look at other modalities of bringing yourself to present centered awareness, but that's not meditation. So let's think of like EFT, emotional freedom technique, or other modalities. People will be like, "Oh, that's neuroplasticity," and there actually isn't studies on that. Now, what EFT or other modalities of healing are doing, and I'm blanking on some of the things that hear about, but along the energy medicine lines, all the different trends and beautiful things that are out there, like healing hands therapy, etc. There's not actual study that if you do healing hands or EFT, here's change in neuroplasticity, where we looked at the, SPEC scans of a brain or a functional MRI of a brain. But what we do know is when you do EFT, it starts to calm you down. And then you should sit down and meditate, right? Is the key. It's the same thing if you're feeling really good and you're like, "Oh, Romy, my mindfulness practices when I'm running or swimming." I always ask my executives who say that, well, then could you sit down just for 5 minutes after you're done swimming or running and meditate then? That's helping to anchor in that mindfulness and meditation. So that was a long-winded answer to neuroplasticity, is that we've oversimplified it. And what I just described is, yes, that it's the abilities brain cells to adapt and change the way they structure and function. And it can be a beneficial thing or a harmful thing.
Right, right. And so it's not always a positive thing, but we can hopefully go in the positive direction by a regular meditation
And then
practice.
this is just like your sister doctor warning, like, be careful of all the supplements and the energy drinks out there, and people saying, "Come to this class and learn this Avanti or Romie's technique. We're gonna improve neuroplasticity." Like, yeah, no, I'd like to see a brain science study first, but yes.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I love that you clarified that. Okay,
Mhm.
so let's go into the long-term effects. So we've done this 4 to 6 weeks. I've been meditating every day for 20 minutes. Now what's going to happen if I keep going?
You keep it going for years, and I mean, I call it nature's best beauty trick. When we meditate for a long time, I'm gonna start maybe in a more esoteric place. It changes our mind and our body and our spirit. And Avante, I don't know about you, but one thing I know is when I'm around people who've had a meditation or mindfulness based practice and they've been doing it for years, don't you just see this glow from them? And you're like, girl, what did you just get a facial? Was that Botox? No, that's meditation, right?
Right.
It's benefits that we know in clinical studies to promote longevity
Mhm.
and youthfulness both in the brain and the rest of the body. And why
Mhm.
is that? Is that we know as you meditate regularly, it has this potent anti inflammatory effect. The first two things I talked about were sure acute and intermediate anti inflammatory effect. But as you go on and you meditate long term, we know that when we take the brain scans of somebody who just started to meditate and they had all those great hormonal changes and experiences versus someone who's meditating long term, they may not get that immediate dopamine high every time they sit down to meditate or that feel good serotonin buzz. And I remember this and many people who meditate. You're going to get 6, 9 months into your meditation practice or 2 years, and you're like, why am I sitting here and not feeling calm? All of a sudden, this feeling of anger just came up out of nowhere, or grief, or rage, or a prickling sensation. And mindfulness now teaches us not to be attached to that emotion. Just say, oh, this is anger. We often say it's some of your subconscious memories or thoughts clearing. But what happens is, and I'm human and this happens to me often too, is you'll sit there and be like, why is this anger coming up? And we immediately attach a story. Oh, it was because yesterday somebody at work like went off on me, and we attach stories. And then it's a risk to say. But what's really happening is a deeper stage of healing psychology, consciously and subconsciously. And this is why, for example, in addiction medicine, as people are going through recovery and rehab from drug and alcohol addiction, that meditating regularly can completely change in the structure of their brain, that they no longer are getting triggered for having a craving,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And that's it. We know that people who chronically meditate or meditate long term, overall, their memory and cognition scores are higher than people that are meditating short term or have never meditated at all. So we give neuropsychology battery tests, and we know that long term, with the change and improvement in function of the brain, that they not only have a better memory, but their processing skills, their executive analytical skills are superior, right? How many of the most brilliant CEOs will tell you, I've had a meditation practice for 20 to 30 years, and they know how to do that, not just this trend and pulling up an app. We also know that people who meditate long term are less likely then to develop depression or anxiety, or if they suffered from a mental health disease earlier, they're less likely to have a refractory episode. We also know in patients with epilepsy, chronic refractory epilepsy, that when they meditate regularly and they're, helping that stress response, that they are resetting a seizure threshold. So things that would normally stress the brain out and cause a seizure in a known epilepsy patient, like sleep deprivation, is less likely to happen. So what do all these things have in common? It's when the brain starts to misfire and the addict gets a craving, or a epileptic brain is going to seize, or a depressed patient is going to have the, inflammation that leads back to a depressive episode, that's less likely to happen. It's like you've permanently started to clean out your filing cabinets.
Right.
But
Right.
what's even more powerful is typically for the non-meditating person, the brain is a sponge for negative thoughts, emotions, and experiences. We now know that a pattern of emotional resilience builds in people that chronically meditate. And those are the people you're like, how come they just go with the flow? Like that pissed me off, and their feathers aren't ruffled. It doesn't mean that they're not paying attention and they didn't notice that something bad or an action was done towards them. They just don't react. It doesn't register as negative. It's literally they're rising above the toxicity.
Right, because it's almost what you were saying is that they have that experience while they're meditating. They don't attach to it and then it clears so that they're not taking that anger, that anxiety, that depression into their interactions with other people, with, their life experiences out in the world, right? They've dealt with it while they're sitting in that chair or on that mat.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, the things like the memories that we have that would trigger a bad memory, but we know this is human nature, Monty. You and I are the same way. We're not above this. Is
Mhm.
something is unresolved from childhood or early adulthood, any size trauma, small or minor. Somebody could come along and say something really harmless, and it triggers you because of other patterns of subconscious things of somebody just said, "You should be vegetarian," and it's triggering a trauma, and you're now finding yourself yelling at a stranger about this rather than being like, "Thank you for your opinion," you know? And so when we chronically meditate, it almost doesn't register that, like, that trigger has been healed.
Right. And so what's so interesting about what you're saying is that, this goes back to sort of our shared perspective being Western trained MDs, South Asian women who grew up with yoga and Ayurveda as these ancient, beautiful healing traditions in our families, right? And so it's almost like what you're translating right now for me and the listeners is this brain science that we know we've studied it, but this ability to connect into yourself and to perhaps something else in the universe, whatever that is, it changes how you respond to things. You have a different it's almost like you're dealing with the traumas from the past, from a past life, if you believe that. Whatever it is, there's something that's happening there that is beyond the realm of this world.
Mhm.
I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about while you're
Well,
saying this.
that's where the spirituality comes in, and I always when I train people in meditation or mindfulness in corporate teams, I have to be very mindful of
Of
we are
course.
dealing with diverse groups, and we need to do it for everyone. But I wanna honor kind of going back to the spiritual pathways of all the different major religions and cultures of the world that some type of meditation or mindfulness practice is a part of that. No, we are not just a brain. We are not just a heart or an endocrine system. We are a mind, body, and spirit. And that we all have our spirit, and there's always this inner knowing, whether I call it your internal soul compass. Some people call it intuition. Some people call it, their connection to divine, whatever that word is for you, is if we're not learning and training ourselves to be still and present and go within and not react to what's going out, we miss what internal soul compass is directing us to do, that divine guided moment. And if you've ever listened to something and you're like, that gave me chills, that's your internal soul compass or intuition speaking to you. Or you wake up in the morning and you just get this weird knowing, like, God, I haven't talked to that friend from college in ages. Something is telling me to reach out. That's your internal soul compass. And that's what meditation helps. And this is why so many of my clients are, you see celebrities who are musicians and creatives taking on meditation. They want to quiet out the noise and tap into that creative divine energy that has made them brilliant painters or rappers or creative. So really it's phenomenal. And for me personally, I think it felt so traumatic in a time when I went through physician burnout. We weren't even calling it that, Avanti. And the burnout and the moral injury and healing from all of that, I had felt like my spirit was broken back then. That my not only was my brain broken, my spirit was, and finding that meditation was healing. And I remember first my aunties telling me, "Beta, what's happened to you? It's like the lights are on and nobody is home. You were such a happy young girl." And then I started the meditation practice, and this was just listening to cassette tapes and modeling the mantras until I came into my own meditation practice, and all of a sudden, the lights were back on, and that's what you're talking about, like, that light is back on in us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I felt too, because I had that part of, losing my spirit. I always say that when I sort of was down on my knees and went back to Ayurveda, it was because I realized that, I had lost connection to everything. It
Yeah.
was like exactly what you're saying. The lights were on, but nobody was there.
Mhm.
And these mindful practices, going back to Ayurveda, yoga, meditation, actually turned the lights back on for
It
me.
does,
So
and I want people to have that.
yeah, yeah. And I want to shift because I know that you have a couple more minutes with me and I want to honor your time because I want to talk about this amazing protocol you have, which is called the BrainSHIFT protocol. Because I think what you've done so beautifully is taken this esoteric concept that we're talking about and you've made it understandable for the regular person, the CEO, the leader, and just for everyday people that are listening to this podcast. I want the listeners to just hear like, what is this brain shift protocol that you've developed to help people with this idea of this busy brain, the burnout that we all
Mhm.
feel?
Yeah. Avanti, probably back in 2017, I started to study a concept. I speak for a living to corporate America and teams, and I would hear the same thing over and over about can't focus at work, can't shut down the brain off at night. And disturb sleep. And I really challenged this notion and started to research in the integrative functional medicine, neurology, psychiatry literature that maybe we as neurologists and psychiatrists got it wrong. That ruminating anxiety, adult onset ADD, and insomnia are not three separate diseases. They're all one spectrum of inflammation. And I call that busy brain. How do we normally in Western culture deal with busy brain? We're caffeinating all day long to try to focus and have energy and or taking prescription Adderall or drugs like that. And at night, people are using alcohol, a sleeping pill to calm down. And we need to get off of that stimulant sedative cycle. That's the busy brain, right? So that's kind of the busy brain, and then I started to study it. There isn't a one size fits all. It's just like, you know, uh, your clothing you're wearing, it doesn't fit all. So the brain shift protocol was designed to look at the root cause of busy brain, and shift stands for 5 key areas that we assess in individuals that go through our program, which is S is for sleep and your circadian rhythm, H is looking at the role of hormones, I is markers of inflammation, F is how we biohack food, and T is the role of technology. And really, in the last few years, especially the role of technology in bringing on adult onset attention deficit disorder. So that's what the brain shift protocol is. So, what does that mean to the real people? Well, this was it. We know in every workplace there is a crisis of people being stressed and burned out. And we need a solution. And I learned early on in the pandemic, and nobody want to hear someone say, "Oh, just eat berries and breathe and everything's going to be fine." Like we had gone so beyond that. Our busy brains
Right.
were wired in a constant state of panic. And so we wanted to do that. So I had time on my hands in the pandemic. I started to do the research and bring my over 20 years of experience in neurology, integrative medicine, mindfulness together and say, what are the 8 most impactful micro habits that can stack on each other that will
Mhm.
heal the negative impacts of stress and burnout? And how can we deliver this at scale using technology to teams? We have anywhere from corporate teams of 50 to 1,000 people going through BrainShift at a time. And it's cohort based learning, and they go through it with me live. And then there's the technology platform. We check labs and we give recommendations. But every week there's a micro habit that they do. And it's amazing because not only are you doing it and feeling better, but now you're feeling this sense of connection to your team and that your
Right.
company cares with you. And so, yeah, that's what brain shift is, and I'm writing the book Busy Brain Cure, and,
Yes, you are.
publishing date is TBD. The book proposal's gone in after all these years of research. We're so excited.
So
And,
excited for you.
thank you, and we have the technology platform and the app that's building. So right now, we only really deliver it to our corporate clients and teams who are calling for an innovative workplace wellness platform. As time goes on in the book, we will release an app and start
Mhm.
doing things with consumers and the community. But listen, if you're like, "Wait a minute, Romy, that sounds like I have a busy brain test," you can take our scientifically developed test for free. Go to my social media, go to the website, if
Mhm.
you can, we'll
We'll
include
link
a
it
link
in the
to the
show
show notes. Thank
notes.
you. It's
Yep.
free. You get a
Mhm.
score, and we give you the first week of our brain shift protocol right there of what to do based on your score. So, it's there, and you can get an assessment. And, we really want to be of service to the public. So we put this part out, and just share because we are just really determined. So that
That's
is
amazing.
the busy brain and brain shift. Thank you.
That's amazing, amazing. Well, I just wanna thank you for that, and I will make sure that that's all linked in the show notes, the Busy Brain test and all of Dr. Romie's information. I just wanna ask you one last question as we
Ask
wrap up
ask
our
more.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
If I offer up the phrase to catalyze healing, what comes up for you?
My initial thought, if I had to have a human sister moment with you, is to feel overwhelmed. And sometimes when we think of healing, all the shoulda, woulda, couldas come in. I know I should be eating cleaner. I would have exercised this morning, but I had an 8 a.m. business call. I could be
Mhm.
doing better with my sleep. And so I think for me, catalyze healing is knowing when the coulda, shoulda, wouldas come up in your brain, that's a busy brain. And that's not your internal
Mm.
soul compass talking to you. I invite you to do something that will invite you to be still. And for those of you that have a busy brain, we talk often of being still, and silently meditating will actually make the anxiety worse. So we actually ask people to do 5 to 10 minutes of a repetitive motion thing with and without digital devices such as washing dishes or walking outside, and counting your steps, shuffling a deck of cards, and then sit and be still. And that's what catalyzed healing is getting rid of the shoulda, woulda, couldas and really saying, that's my busy brain. That's not my best self. And going into your internal soul compass and asking in this moment, what is it that my spirit really needs to heal today in my brain and body and for my team?
Mm. I mean, I have chills. Beautiful. Romie, thank you so much. This was incredible.
Yeah. Thank you for what you're doing, especially uplifting South Asian voices in this world of traditional healing. So much of our healing has been culturally appropriated. And by bringing not only me on as a doctor and a good friend, but as someone who is a practicing Sufi, it really honors to anchor back into the traditions that are of our people and really stop the Instagram culture of people misappropriating our words. So thank you for catalyzing that healing of our global healing traditions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sister. Love you so much. And your work is so important. And I can't wait to see all the amazing things you do. I hope that all the listeners are going to take your quiz and follow you and really look at your work because I think it's so important in this world. Thank you, my dear. Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at avantikumarsingh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing because healing starts within.